to start off, the first question is, please introduce yourself and describe your personal professional journey thus far, beginning in college.
Yeah, I'm happy to begin. Hey everyone, my name is Emma Fulop. I'm a 2015 grad. I'm currently the program coordinator at Duke University in the Carbon Offsets Initiative office. So at Davidson, I was an environmental studies major and an anthropology minor. I focused on geology while at Davidson. I was really interested in physical systems and understanding the landscape. We got to go on really cool field trips, so that was a huge bonus. But then with anthropology, I began to kind of get more interested in kind of how our physical space impacts culture and society, and like how people interact with the environment, and then how the environment shapes people, all those kinds of questions. And while I was at Davidson, I had the opportunity to work in the sustainability department as a work study. I actually worked with Cameron, who's not able to join us, but he and I really focused on implementing the composting system for the first time, which was really fun. We got to go out and just dump a lot of trash into the industrial composter and figure out how all that works. We did a lot of behavior change work in terms of getting people to recycle, to compost, things like that. And so then after I graduated, I went to work at the Catawba Lands Conservancy through the Davidson Impact Fellows program. And so I worked there. It's a land conservancy based in Charlotte. So we protect land, and then they also have another organization called the Carolina Thread Trail. And so I also worked on the Thread Trail to promote trail usage, to figure out how to build more trails in the Charlotte region. I worked there for a year. It was wonderful. I got really interested in issues of like access to natural resources and environmental justice, like where are trails placed? How do people get to them? How does that impact housing prices, and how does it impact crime and everything like that? And so after that year was finished, I went to DC, where I worked on national land conservation through a national land trust organization. And then I came back to North Carolina in, early 2017. And I began to work at a farm in North Carolina while I was applying to grad school. So then I went to, sorry, this is very long, but I went to Duke. I got my master's in environmental management. I focused on community-based environmental management. So how do we involve communities in these environmental decision-making processes? Then after I graduated, I worked for a short bit at the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality and Environmental Education. And then I joined DCOI, which again, it's housed in the Sustainability Office at Duke, and we are focused on developing offset projects, so projects that reduce or sequester carbon to kind of account for other carbon emissions at the university.
Same question?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Hi everyone, Alyssa Bryan. I'm a 2017 Davidson alum. I was actually not in environmental studies at Davidson. I was a double major in political science and economics. Various involvements. I was in Warner Hall. I was in dinner at Davidson. I did a lot of admissions work, and so was a senior admissions fellow. But my interest in environmental sustainability actually came after my time at Davidson. So I graduated from Davidson knowing that I was going into a role with a management consulting firm. So I am currently an engagement manager and a sustainability fellow at McKinsey & Company in our Charlotte, North Carolina location, but didn't originally know that sustainability was going to be a large portion of that journey. I went immediately from Davidson actually to get a one-year master's in international development at the London School of Economics. And so that was where my interest and passion and excitement around sustainability came. So I was coming at it from a sustainable development lens. And so one of thinking through how do we basically facilitate leapfrog development around the world in places where you don't have the, frankly, constraints that come with, looking at the electric grid in the United States, for example, or the existing water infrastructure that we have in place. Like, where are there things that you can really build, but not just build back better, but build better from the first place? And during my time at the London School of Economics, I had the opportunity to intern with an organization called Systemic, which is an environmental consultancy based in London. They also have offices in Berlin and in Jakarta. And they did basically business consulting for sustainability. And so the extent to which there are corporations who in many ways are responsible for the largest portions of our waste footprint, and actively working with those folks on ways that we can drive innovation and change at sort of the highest levels of corporations and enterprises. And so came from that, went back to McKinsey and Company at the end of 2018, and have since been at McKinsey. About a year ago, I made a pretty hard pivot from doing what we call sort of a random walk. So doing work in a bunch of different industries, everything from growth strategy for a organic grocer to working in nuclear power plants to doing work on hospital supply chains, to doing all of my work in sustainability. And so I do work in sustainable and circular economies and ESG investing, and then equally sort of anything that what we call sort of sustainability transformations. And so what that means very tactically, I'm sure many of you saw the statements made by corporations like BlackRock very early this year, where they basically said, hey, we recognize that our business is not just our business, but our business is also to the people of the world. And so with that has been a sort of incredible wave of change with many of our corporate partners who historically have not been talking about sustainability, but are now thinking very tactically around what is the right way to operationalize sustainable principles in their business models. So right now, for example, I'm working with a coalition of 20 multinational corporations to develop a perspective on water use in their supply chains. And so we're developing the benchmarking tools that are going to enable them to basically assess relative performance against water, and then also importantly, build the business case around, based on how we're doing on water within our organization today, how do we convince the CEO that it's worth investing in water and water-related improvements in basin health and ecosystems? I do work across a lot of different industries. Right now I'm in water, but that's maybe a very tactical example for you guys.
Thank you. It's really helpful to see two very different paths, because sustainability is really diverse, and a lot of people have trouble understanding what a career in sustainability could look like. So thank you for that. What is your interest in sustainability, and how do you see that reflected in your current career path? I guess that's a little related to the first question, but if you could dive deeper.
Yeah, so my interest in sustainability really kind of stems from that intersection again between the environment and society, and kind of how those two things are so closely related. And then I'm also really interested in sustainability just because of like the aspect of innovation that's really inherent to it. Sustainability initiatives generally just like allow for people to try a lot of different things, and like allows for failure, and kind of understand that that's part of getting, of eventually succeeding. And I think that's really a useful framework. And I guess, I was never really focused on getting a career in sustainability per se. At Davidson, I was really interested in the concept of sustainability, working in the sustainability office. But when I graduated, that wasn't kind of where I was focusing. I was more interested in working with people, with communities, and something that I'm passionate about. But then I also wanted to make sure that I brought those sustainability pillars and concepts into my work wherever I was working. And so that's kind of how I did that. And so while getting my master's degree, I was really focusing on environmental justice and urban spaces, and found that sustainability principles just really fit well into that. When you're talking about like, how do people access bus systems? You have to think about, like where the bus is going, how can people pay for them? How is that like, are buses reducing emissions from cars, or are they just adding more because no one's riding them? A lot of things like that. And so, so never really studied specifically sustainability. I didn't ever take like a class in corporate sustainability or anything like that, but I found those concepts kind of coming into play a lot. And I think it's really important to use sustainability in just general work, because a lot of stuff we do in the environment, everything we do in the environment, it's not siloed, it's not a closed system, it's an open system that like impacts everyone and everything. And so I think it's really important to have that holistic approach. And so in my current position at the Carbon Offsets Initiative, I'm working again, developing carbon offset projects using methodologies that are really rigid and have a lot of rules. But in that space, I get to think about what are the benefits beyond greenhouse gas emissions of the projects I'm creating. So we're planting trees in Durham where Duke is located, and we're thinking about, okay, can these trees, can we plant trees in areas that have historically not had trees because they're in redline communities, they're in communities that in the 1950s were said to be undesirable, partially because of the Black populations that lived there. And so can we plant trees that are then going to bring back, shade and stormwater infiltration and things like that, while also capturing carbon from the atmosphere? And so that's been, kind of an example of how I've kind of been incorporating sustainability into my current career.
I want to pick up on something that Emma said at the beginning there, which is like sustainability really is embedded in virtually every single thing that we do. And so regardless of the career path that you ultimately land on, you should be thinking about the right way to bring sustainability into those conversations. I'm speaking to this from a context of not having done sustainability related work for the first 18 months that I was at McKinsey, and then doing sort of a very hard pivot to only doing sustainability related work. I was a bit the grasshopper on the shoulder of people on my team and across industries asking the sustainability related questions, even when they weren't necessarily being asked in the room in that moment. And so I'm thinking of an example for when we were doing work with the grocer. So I was working with one of like a niche grocer that's sort of growing pretty rapidly in the US, and helping them think through their growth strategy. But in the context of those conversations, their director of sustainability came to us and said, hey, we're trying to decide whether or not we should swap out our styrofoam trays for our meat to compostable alternatives or to recyclable alternatives, and we don't know how we should be thinking about that. And on another team, what might have happened in that instance would be that the team said, hey, that's not our area of expertise, but best of luck making that determination. But in the instance with my team, what we said was, hey, we're happy to help you think through it. And so the partner and I sat down with the director of sustainability at this grocer and helped them tactically decide like cost implications, environmental benefit, hygiene implications, all of those things, to make a holistic decision on the right product for them to be putting into their product portfolio. And so for me, like totally not related whatsoever to sustainability in terms of the overarching product or the project that we were doing, but forcing and bringing it in and constantly being the voice to bring that in, I think is something that I have found to be really valuable, even when I'm not in specifically sustainability related spaces. Maybe one more example of that. So Emma, you mentioned the composting program at Davidson and how you guys were crucial in getting that set up. We set up a composting program in our office when we changed offices. We moved offices last October. And so to be the person who raised their hand and said, hey, we're redesigning the cafe space anyway, how can we think about very tactically implementing things that mean that we are a little bit practicing what we're preaching in our sustainability practice to begin with, and implementing composting, having the opportunity to reduce single-use, and we actually eliminated single-use plastics in the office, and being a part of those ongoing conversations has been something that's been really important for me in my postgraduate career.
And thinking into the future, can you speak about specific challenges of the industry and what you see as the future of sustainability?
Yeah. So I can only really speak from the perspective of like on-campus sustainability, because that's really the only place I've worked within sustainability. But I've noticed since being here, I've been in my position for a year, and even at Davidson, that a lot of the focuses of sustainability are these like measurable on-campus environmental aspects. So things like, how do you reduce like energy usage in buildings? How do you reduce waste, and like where does the waste go? And these things that are really, I think, like easy but yet impactful stories are really kind of the focus of a lot of on-campus sustainability offices. People can get behind, diverting waste from a landfill. People can get behind technologies that turn your lights off for you. It's like a really easy, quick thing that you get. And I think, and this is like really important work, it's needs to be done, especially like as we're facing this climate crisis, we need to do everything we can to like reduce our footprint. And these offices are also, working within university constraints. There's neutrality commitment. So like Duke, we have committed to be climate neutral by 2024. And so that's our focus. It's 2020, we're putting a lot of our energy towards how do we get to neutrality. But I've seen a lot more conversations happening about the social and economic pillars, more so than like ever before. There's conversations about how do we address affordable housing in the communities our schools are in, how do we address food insecurity, how do health and wellness of our employees fit into our sustainable framework. And these are really new focuses, and I think they came to light partially because of like our current state of affairs, the inequalities that COVID brought about, like the inherent racism in our society and institutions that we're facing, that we're kind of fighting. And so things like environmental racism, equity, climate justice are kind of becoming more of a shared vocabulary. And it's really exciting, but I think a challenge that we're going to face is making sure that this momentum continues and that we're doing this work properly, that we're including the right people in the conversations, that we're not doing harm because we're trying to do good. And so, yeah, that's where I kind of think the current challenges are going to come from.
Happy to provide a little bit more of, I guess, a business back view, because I do tend to work with corporations. I think we work with nonprofits, we work with public sector entities, but the majority of the work that we do is with large multinational corporations. I think there's a couple of key trends that are continuing to drive the conversation around sustainability for corporations in the US and also abroad. I think the first place I would start is where I already started, which is the conversation on purpose, and the fact that you have the Larry Finks of the world who are actively saying, this is not about this is not about our shareholders, this is about the people of the world that are benefiting or being injured as a result of our day-to-day actions. And so every single company, for the most part right now, is having a bit of a purpose reckoning on what does it actually mean for me to be a steward of both my corporation, but also the steward of the resources within that corporation as a entity within the broader ecosystem, which is the world or the country, whatever the case may be. And so that's sort of at the very, very tip. I think within that, there's probably 3 or 4 different trends that I can highlight. I think one is capital flows, and we're seeing pretty intently that ESG focused investments or various investment funds that are specifically targeted towards stocks or bonds or whatever the case may be that are supporting sustainability related efforts are growing at a disproportionate rate relative to the rest of the market growth. And so capital is actually actively allocating itself, instead of being, a couple years back, I think we've had a lot of conversations on how do you X things out of your portfolio. Instead, we're now having a lot of conversations around how do you actively craft a portfolio that is explicitly serving your desires and your interests, which in many cases may be sustainability related and environmentally focused. I think another one that's on the completely opposite side of the spectrum, but is the conversation around circularity. A lot of corporations are realizing that their business models are not sustainable in their current footprint. And in doing so, they're seeing a couple of things, right? One is the sort of very negative view of downstream post-consumer waste. And so the companies like the Coca-Colas of the world, the Mondelez's of the world, like all of these massive corporations are making huge commitments to recycling pledges. They're making huge commitments to material inputs that are more long-term sustainable for the planet. Whether they actually achieve them, I think, is a different question, but they are putting the numbers on the page and saying we are going to strive to achieve this by 2025, by 2030, whatever the case may be. And then they're funding the innovations earlier on in their supply chains to make that a possibility. So you think of like Coca-Cola's Every Bottle Back campaign, where the impetus around the campaign was one, like, let's get our waste out of the streams, out of the oceans, like out of where it is currently polluting. But another huge impetus on it is, if it's cheaper for me to collect those Coke bottles that have already been used in the market and channel that back into my supply chain, then there is a tangible benefit for my business and there's a huge bump from a consumer sentiment perspective. And so a lot of corporations are thinking about that. There's a nonprofit here in Charlotte called Envision Charlotte, which is partnering with Coke Consolidated and Sealed Air on a similar sort of every bottle back, or send me, I think it's called Send Me On My Way campaign, where they act, and Sealed Air, by the way, is the people who make bubble wrap. So I had no idea who Sealed Air was, but they're the people that make bubble wrap. And when you order something from Amazon, the Sealed Air packets that your package come with. And so they're actively making those decisions around how does it look and what does it mean to take their own waste and make it a material input into their supply chain. The last one I'll highlight, Emma, to the awesome work that you're doing is exactly the conversation on offsets, right? I think a lot of corporations are making strong commitments on carbon neutrality, which for the most part are being satisfied sort of first on offsets and then through sort of operational improvements in their business models. McKinsey made a commitment in 2019 to go carbon, or maybe 2018 to go carbon neutral. And so we leverage a significant amount of offsets in order to make that possible, given the amount of air travel that we normally do. And we are by no means the only corporation doing that. Like people like Delta Airlines is sort of a carbon neutral, or it has targets to be carbon neutral in the next 5 or 10 years. And so that means there's a huge push towards how can we think about regenerating the environments that are, you know, pretty far down the value chain from us, but being harmed by our day-to-day operations. That's just a couple of things.
And so just to tie that back a little more to sustainability careers, I'm just curious, have you all seen a growth in positions specifically catering to those things? You all mentioned, Emma, like a focus on economic and social pillars and responsibility within nonprofits and higher ed, and Ally, roles catered to like ESG and supply chain management specifically for sustainability. Have you seen these positions grow, or do you think that's gonna happen in the future?
Yeah, so maybe just quickly on that from my lens, I think we are increasingly doing more of this work, which means that they're at every single corporation, they are increasingly looking for people to fill spots to do this work, right? Like you think of some of the largest corporations in the world and they have relatively small sustainability teams and are increasingly realizing that one, sustainability is not a function that sits in isolation, but instead is one that needs to have sort of a hand in many cookie jars. And so they're trying to figure out like what's the right org structure that can actually support their sustainability goals, which means that they're having to find and train people to speak to those specific needs on a corporate level. I think in terms of like the work that we do at McKinsey, like this is by no means the majority of the work that we do at McKinsey, but as an increasingly large share of work, and I only do this work, and so there's enough of it that I can only do it for a sustained period of time. But definitely, like my role is not one that you would apply to immediately after undergrad, just because we do have a generalist model where you sort of do a bit of a random walk before you have the opportunity to specialize.
Yeah, and I think that these positions will become more available. The social and economic kind of like change in focus or refocus, I guess, that I was talking about is something that's I've really noticed in the past couple of months. And I know that as everyone is probably tired of hearing, COVID has really impacted our ability to be able to, you know, create new jobs or put more money towards those focuses right now. But I can definitely see that growing in the future. I also know just from, you know, working with people in the community and working with like the city of Durham or like the county of Durham, that there are sustainability positions within local government, within other nonprofits that hadn't existed before, like within the past 5-10 years. And so now that people know what sustainability is, it's becoming more of a word that people use frequently. They understand what it is. As that understanding grows about the importance of sustainability work, I think that those positions will also continue to develop.
Thank you. So what advice would you give to a current student, either highly considering a career in sustainability or a student who is not so sure?
I think my biggest piece of advice which I know is not something I wanted to hear as an undergrad, is to network with people who are in sustainability. I mean, just listening to Allie, her perspective and the work she does in sustainability in like the business and corporate side is so just different from what I do in higher education and the nonprofit world. And so I think you really need to talk with a lot of people to understand what they're doing in sustainability, like why are you interested in sustainability, and how can that be plugged into this larger scope of work, or like how are your other interests connected to sustainability? Like you might not know if you're really interested in economics. I mean, Allie's talked a lot about kind of having to do, I mean, I don't even have the terminology for it, but like the cost comparison and like looking at products and seeing like how your changing from styrofoam to compostable materials affects your bottom line. That's sustainability, but that also requires a background in kind of economics, understanding of business. And so I think that having those conversations can really kind of shed light on places that your specific skills could really plug into.
I think reinforcing again the talk to people element, right? Like I last week was on a call with a bunch of alums from a variety of class years. It was like 2002 to 2019. And we were all just going around and saying, oh, this is what I'm doing. And one of the guys who's like a 2007 alum got on and was like, hi, I'm Hayden. And like, I work at the WWF doing water sustainability work. And I was like, we should talk, right? Like, that's really cool to then like have those parallels. And I think, you know, Davidson alums are absolutely fantastic, right? In terms of they actually want to hear from you, and they will actively search out opportunities to connect and understand what's on your mind and share what their experience has been. And so definitely do that. I think the other thing to explore is where do you want sustainability to be core to the work that you do, or do you want there to be a sustainability component to the work that you do? Because I think that can also drive the type of thing, like if you need the economics minor or like whatever the case may be to help direct you in where you would want to be post-grad. I think Emma and I both have master's degrees too, right? So that's something to also keep in mind, is that Davidson doesn't offer super tailored degrees in sustainability, but there are a lot of, you know, 1 or 2 year master's programs that can help you to get to an additional level of depth. That if you're looking to specialize in one specific aspect of this, you could do so, right? And so definitely something to consider there as well.
And last question, is additional education required? You kind of just answered that. And are there other credentials or skills students should hone in on now to be competitive for the job market, such as soft or technical skills?
Yeah, and maybe I did just say it would be helpful. I don't know that it's necessary. I think in my case, I went and got a master's. I went and did a 1 year master's because I didn't think that I could do two full more years of post-secondary education. And so I did something quick that I knew would be a topic that I was interested and excited about. But the job that I had already signed my full-time offer before I had gone and done the master's. And so I figured that out beforehand. I think this is a space where there are a lot of things you can specialize in, right? And so to the extent that you have something you're super passionate about that you haven't been able to dive into at Davidson, there could be an opportunity to explore. I don't think it's table stakes though. I think the reality is that the Davidson education and the dynamic way that we think about teaching you to solve any problem, every problem, whatever the case may be, is an incredible asset to a multifunctional workplace. And so would encourage you guys to think about what is the right way to frame the fact that I know how to think to people who are looking for people fresh out of undergrad, because frankly, like unfortunately, there are very few people that actually know how to think. And when they're given a problem, can actually think through the dynamic elements of what do I need to figure out in order to get to the end result here. And so that capability, which Davidson, I think, teaches above and beyond everything, is what allows Davidson students to be the most competitive in the job market, whether that's in sustainability or in something else.
Yeah, I would really echo everything that Allie just said. I have my master's degree in environmental management. I got it because of some other kind of constraints, and I wanted to do a slight pivot in my career. But so I wouldn't say it's necessary for the position I have. I went to school with a lot of people who were getting their master's focusing in business in the environment because they wanted to get into corporate sustainability. I think that was useful for them. But again, I know a lot of people, Davidson grads especially, who are in my network, who have positions in sustainability who don't have their master's degree. But they have a pretty, well, as far as I could tell, they had a pretty clear focus of like why they wanted to get into sustainability. They had those skills that Ali talked about. They had, research skills, project management skills. They knew how to work with people. That's really important in sustainability. They knew how to write well. You have to, a lot of, at least what I do in sustainability is explaining to people what sustainability is, why should they care about this carbon offset and the benefits of it, instead of, and like, why should they pay more for a better one? And so you have to have just those, I would say those are just the soft skills, those communication and research skills are really helpful.
And so we have a bit of time left, so maybe we can go over the responses of the person who was not able to make it.
Sure, I can read from Cameron's. We also have a couple questions in the chat too.
Okay, should we start the questions at 3:50 or right now?
Let me go through Cameron's responses and then we'll see what our time looks like, and then we can hit up those questions.
Okay.
So you'll have to bear with me. So I've got his in front of me now. So for number one, please introduce yourself and describe your personal journey through thus far, beginning in college. So his name is Cameron. And I'll just read it verbatim. I'm going to try to keep this fairly simple since I know it can get boring and hard to track. I came into Davidson interested in the environment, ended up pursuing the environmental studies major and anthropology minor. I participated in the freshman Eco Reps program, worked for the sustainability office when it opened, was a sustainability scholar with the city of Charlotte, and spent a summer working on the campus farm after graduating. I also spent a summer as an environmental education intern with a small nonprofit in Raleigh, North Carolina. After graduation, he did some traveling and volunteer farming, then spent some time at home while looking for work. Eventually, he landed a job with a toxicology lab within the Environmental Protection Agency, which has a big research facility close to Durham, North Carolina. His position was a communication specialist, so he helped represent the lab at scientific conferences, hosted webinars, wrote some social media posts, organized meetings, and sent lots and lots of emails. Towards the end of his time at the EPA, he was hoping to work in higher education in sustainability and was applying to jobs in that field. He got some interviews, but never any offers, and been told multiple times that all the finalists had a master's degree. So he decided to apply to graduate school. He applied to 4 graduate programs, got into 2, and decided to attend the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability. His degree was a 2-year Master's of Science degree where he focused on behavior education and communication. His coursework included environmental psychology, sustainability education, and environmental justice. His master's project was working with the University Dining Program to estimate the greenhouse gas emissions from their purchased food and make recommendations for reducing those emissions. He also became involved in a fair bit of climate activism on campus and in Ann Arbor. He graduated this past May. Since graduating, he's been looking for work, and he just started as a part-time environmental educator position with Ann Springs in Fort Mill, South Carolina, which is why he was unable to be with us today. Moving right along. So with question 2, what is your interest in sustainability? How do you see that reflected in your current career path? So his interest in sustainability, like many people in the field, started with an environmental background. Not surprisingly, his concern around climate change is one of the factors that made him passionate about the field. More recently, he's found himself drawn towards environmental justice, food justice, climate justice, and social justice issues in general. It's hard to look back and pinpoint exact moments that shaped his career path to this point, but He thinks a critical question he reflected on is, what am I passionate about and what do I find meaningful? This is probably a bit obvious, but he still thinks it's the most important question to think about. If you aren't going to have the answer in, I think he means once a day, and the answer may change day to day, week to week, month to month. But over time, you will learn about who you are and what is most important to you. And he will continue that on in question 4. With question 3, can you speak to specific challenges of the industry? What you see is the future of sustainability. He said the biggest challenge that he sees in the field of sustainability is embracing all aspects of sustainability, especially making sure that social sustainability and social justice are treated as just as essential as environmental or economic sustainability. So if sustainability professionals fail to approach their work with that kind of lens, he suspects that sustainability will come to be viewed as just another corporate buzzword without much substance to it. If sustainability professionals can embrace this more inclusive approach to sustainability, then he thinks it can become a powerful concept connecting a lot of amazing people and organizations doing several different things. He thinks the future of this field is to recognize that environmental field has historically been very white and wealthy, and that the sustainability field has to grow beyond that to become a powerful force for good. Question 4, what advice would you give to a current student, either highly considering a career in sustainability or a student not so sure? So sustainability is such a broad label that he would encourage students in both of these situations to think about the specific issues that they are passionate about. So a key with him is passion. What are you passionate about? A well-rounded education, critical thinking skills, and an understanding of the many facets of sustainability are a great foundation for any career path, and you should develop those at Davidson. But it can be helpful to focus on a few topics or fields that you're passionate about when you start your job search. I know this can sound counterintuitive. Why not keep your options open to any job, right? But the problem that can come from this is we all have a limited amount of time and energy. And when you try to consider every possible pathway, it's hard to put the necessary energy into pursuing any particular path. It is better, in his opinion, to submit 5 strong applications that you worked hard on versus 50 weak job applications that you rushed through. I would also echo that 110%. And that was not a paid plug, but I will repeat that again. So this doesn't mean that you have to know exactly what you want to do with your career, because he certainly hasn't figured that out himself. Have you really enjoyed teaching and working with students in your experience? Maybe sustainability outreach or environmental education is a good path to explore. Do you really like political science courses? Then maybe you should look into jobs focused on policy, advocacy, activism, whether it's sustainability focused or not. So by reflecting on the issues and fields that you're passionate about, then you can sort of see what you want to do in the long run. And then the last question, and I'm gonna actually take a drink of water really quick, sorry. Power through it. Is additional education required to be successful in a career in sustainability? Are there other credentials, skills students should hone now to be competitive for the job market, both soft or technical? So as far as education goes, the advice he got, which he thinks was good advice, was as follows. If you're confident you want to follow a career path that requires additional education, for example, the medical field, legal field, etc., go ahead with that process after graduation. If you're less sure about your career path, or your career path may not require additional education, it can be helpful to work for at least a year or two, learn a little bit more about the kind of work you enjoy or don't enjoy, and then build your resume. If you start running into the situation where you're applying for jobs and aren't being considered because you don't have an additional degree, then that's a good reason to consider going back to school. That was his experience as he was applying to jobs in higher education sustainability, where unsurprisingly, many people have at least a master's degree. He interviewed for several jobs and was told that he was a solid candidate, but all the finalists had that additional degree. The other benefit that comes from following this process is you have a strong argument you can make in your grad school applicants for why you want to pursue an additional degree. The main skill that he would encourage students to hone is the soft skill job descriptions often refer to as leadership, management, supervision, or some other term along those lines. Each of these terms has a different meaning and is used to mean different things by different organizations, but at the core, he thinks that organizations want to see that you have been responsible for a project or team in the past and know how to handle that responsibility. I know it can be intimidating to be in charge of something, especially when you're just out of school and new to an organization, but he promises that if you're capable of growing into that role, taking charge of a project or team will make you make a much stronger pitch for future jobs because you'll be confident in describing what the project was, and you can tell your potential employer that at the end of the day, it was your responsibility. Basically, his advice would be to look for opportunities to take responsibility and fill a leadership role. Ask your supervisor if those are kinds of opportunities are available, and have faith in yourself when you take over one of those roles that you can handle it.
Thank you so much for reading those. And thank you to Cameron for sending those. So we have a lot of great questions. First one being, did you ever do any E&V related internships at Davidson? If yes, which ones?
Yeah, I similarly to Cameron did sustainability scholars the summer after my sophomore year. I worked at Clean Air Carolina, which is an advocacy organization in Charlotte that advocates for better air quality in the state of North Carolina.
I did not. So I spent a summer learning Mandarin in Beijing. I by the way, speak zero Mandarin now. So think about that when you decide if you're going to spend 3 months living in a country to learn a language and then never use it again. I spent a summer in DC on the Davidson and Washington program doing an internship that was not related to sustainability. And then I had a summer with McKinsey.
Awesome.
1 second, Alexandra. I know that there are several first years in the room. Yancey, if you're still with us, would you like to give a quick plug onto what Sustainability Scholars is?
Yeah, thanks, Dalton. Sorry to shameless plug here, but I actually captured everybody's name on the call, so you'll be hearing from me later this semester. But there are other viewers I can tell on the call who have also been part of that program, but it's a summer internship program partnering students with Charlotte-based organizations for paid work on sustainability projects, and it also includes some cohort time with people like Dalton and myself and lots of guest speakers and field trips around Charlotte to learn more about this topic and opportunities in the field.
Thank you, Yancey. It's a really great program. Next question, do you have any advice for looking for sustainability related jobs after graduation? Most searches yield environmental education or scientific research type jobs, but I'm looking for more community-based humanities jobs.
I can try to answer that. I completely get the feeling of typing in sustainability or environment into a search engine and Indeed and just getting everything in the world because they all are using that term. So I think it's really helpful, especially if you're thinking about community-based jobs, to kind of think about the topic that you're interested in. Are you interested in working in with food? Because then you could, find an area or a geographic location and look at what are there community gardens? Are there organizations that deliver food, and kind of talk to those people and see if they have ideas or if they have jobs that maybe don't have sustainability in the title, but like we've been talking about, incorporate sustainability principles into the work, or have the room for you to grow and to kind of take it in that direction. So I think it's really useful to think about the subject area first rather than focus on a position title.
Yeah, I think just to echo that, on the business side, find an industry that you want to do sustainability related work in. And then within the context of that industry, start to reach out to folks to understand the right titles or positions. I think the reality is a lot of entry level positions in business are sort of business analyst or research analyst roles. And so that might not pop up when you are looking at something on Indeed. But if you have the open and honest conversation with the director of sustainability type role, those could be the folks that you're looking to work with.
I would also interject there that looking this from a career services standpoint, you can always come in and you can chat with me specifically, and we can try to figure out the best pathway for you, because maybe looking at Indeed or whatever job search engine you're looking at is not the best one. There are ones out there that are more tailored to the industry that you're trying to look at. So I'd also recommend, chatting with me, create an appointment, and we can sort of chat through that process of what are you looking for within the realms of sustainability.
Next question. Thank you so much to all of the alumni panelists. What do you see as some of the trade-offs for professionals choosing the different kinds of paths? 1, solo or small team of sustainability professionals embedded in larger organizations. 2, part of an org or larger team within a larger organization with a distinct sustainability mission. And 3, professional in a more technical field with sustainability as one aspect of what they do. I can repeat the question.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you could just drop it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a visual person. Thank you.
And the second part is, how have the panelists reflected on particular focus areas within sustainability, and or what are they thinking for any future transitions they may want to make within or outside that topic? Oh wait, I'm sorry, did I send that privately again? There you go.
I can try to answer this first part of kind of the trade-offs. I think if you're thinking about size of team and organization, I mean, it all depends, again, on the organization you're working for, but I think in my experience, the smaller organizations, the nonprofits, they have typically a lot less funding, but they also have more room to explore. It's like when I worked for the Catawba Lands Conservancy, the CEO was the one making the decisions, and he was the person I reported directly to. And so I got to go into his office and say, like, hey, I think it'd be really cool if we did this series to did like a bike tour of the area and specifically targeted this community. And he could just be like, yeah, that's a great idea, go for it. But now working at Duke, which is a much larger institution, we have a lot more money to do a lot more things, which is really, really useful. But we have to kind of go through different people. We have to talk to the vice president of academic affairs. We've talked to board of trustees people. There's presidents making decisions. It's a lot more bureaucratic, and so it can be a lot slower. You can't really just go in with an idea necessarily. You might be able to. I don't want to say like you can't, but I think there's going to be a lot more steps and potentially less room for kind of creativity, but not necessarily. I have a lot of creativity in my job at Duke, but I would say that could be a trade-off. Yeah.
I think to pile onto that in a corporate lens. So there are a lot of different ways that you can do sustainability work within organizations. I think to create the parallels here, sort of the number one would be like you are on GAP's sustainability team, right? And you are responsible for thinking about how does GAP Inc. operationalize sustainability in their day-to-day business model. Number two would be you are working at an electric vehicle startup, right? And so you are part of a small dynamic team who are actively working on a sustainability related problem. And then I'm not really sure what three would look like in a business context. But I think like the trade-offs there are exactly as Emma's saying, like very similar, right? Like if you're working on GAP's sustainability team, like you are driving like one of the largest apparel makers in the world to improve their day-to-day business practices. But you are in their sustainability team, which is in their legal team, which doesn't have day-to-day operational control over what people are actually doing. So you're building a business case that you're then having to convince someone else to operationalize for you. versus if you're like working with Uber Elevate, and so you're working with an electric vehicle helicopter company, like super small team, like you have the dynamic ability to be actively driving forward the conversation, but it could be that no one ever contracts Uber Elevate to do anything, right? And so you might never see the impact of that work go into its realization. One of the reasons I like being a management consultant is because I can sort of play both roles, right? So I've worked with super small innovative startups on the problems that they're challenging to push the needle every single day. But then I also work with large multinational corporations who are basically the people in the legal department, who includes their sustainability team, saying, hey, we shouldn't be in the legal department, right? Like we should be actively involved in the day-to-day operational decisions of the company. And we work with them to figure out how to make that a possibility.
And the second part of that question, how have you all reflected on particular focus areas within sustainability, and or what are you thinking for any future transitions you may want to make within or outside of sustainability?
So my very strong opinion is that right now is the time to be doing sustainability work. The tide that we're over the hump of people, and frankly, in Europe, this was probably 5 years ago. So yes, we're still behind, but the reality is in the US, at least, we are now sort of over the hump where people are asking themselves, is this a problem? And we are now actively making progress on resolving it. And I think one of the really cool elements of that is that a lot of it is actually coalition driven. And so it's public-private partnerships working together to develop the best approach to a problem, or multiple corporations getting together because they all have the same problem, that they're massively exposed to really, a ton of plastic downstream in their value chain, like whatever the case may be. And so in terms of sort of future transitions, I'm staying exactly where I am, at least for the near term, because it feels like now is the time to really be doing this work, and probably the next 5 to 10 years are the sweet spot for doing so.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I'm also staying in my current position for now. It's been a year. I'm really excited to kind of see what develops from it. I think this might be not quite what this person is asking, but when I took my position at the Carbon Offset Initiative, I actually didn't really know a lot about what carbon offsets were, and I had a lot of questions about them. I still don't think that they're like a silver bullet solution, that they're like the way to solve our problems. I have a lot of questions. Yeah, there's a lot of questions about kind of like the validity of offsets that I think are really necessary. And I think that that's actually been a really great place for me to think about sustainability and to think about what is the work that I'm doing and how am I kind of working to solve these potential issues I might see in offsets, and like how can I think about these co-benefits that I talked about, and how can I make those be more, play more of a role in decisions that we're making at Duke. And so I think that there's a lot of different spaces for growth within this position that I'm really excited to explore. And like Ali said, it's so important right now to be in sustainability. And so I want to just be sure that I'm putting all of my talents to this issue. So yeah, gonna stay here for now.
So the next question is for Ali. Charlotte is currently trying to decide between a major in economics or environmental studies. Do you think one is better than the other?
I actually never considered the major in environmental studies. My freshman roommate was actually a major in the environmental studies, and I think had a really phenomenal experience with it. I've heard great things about the department. I'm sure you can speak to it in more detail. I chose, so I did economics and political science, and started with poli-sci actually, and added economics on the back end. And that came from a place of sort of interest in behavioral economics. And so what are the ways, like how do you drive individual decision making, and like what is the rationale behind that? I think the reality is that wherever you ultimately land, the wonderful thing about Davidson is you can take classes in both disciplines. And so exploring those opportunities to complement your course set in whichever one you are not in. And then I've seen people on their resumes say like equivalent of minor in economics or whatever the case may be for a place where the minor might not be an option. You should absolutely do that and explore all of those courses in different disciplines, because Davidson provides that opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little biased because I am an environmental studies major, but I think it is like the ultimate interdisciplinary major. You get to, focus on really whatever aspect you want to of the environment, like the physical environment, do more science focused, do more humanities focused, do econ in the environment. There's just a lot of space for you to kind of tailor that major to your interests. But I say that again, as an environmental major who took one economics course. So take that, with a grain of salt.
The next question, did either of you do any field work during or after college? If so, what type of field work and what location would you recommend?
I did field work for my capstone project. I'm blanking on the name now, but I spent the summer after my junior year. I had a grant from Davidson to do research over the summer, collect data for my capstone. So I did my field work on dunes on the coast of Michigan, Lake Michigan, up in Michigan. It's really cool. I don't know if you want to do your field work there. It was really specific to my research, which was aging these particular dunes and kind of figuring out what the climate was like and how that impacted the formation of dunes. It was super fun though. I would, if you have a chance to do some field work at Davidson, I would recommend it. It was, a really fun experience.
I didn't do any field work, so I'll pause there. I do want to quickly, though, before I forget, the really cool Charlotte nonprofit is hosting a virtual conference in 2 weeks, and McKinsey is actually the knowledge partner for it. It's called the Cities in Circularity Conference. If anyone is interested, feel free to register and join. McKinsey is hosting a panel specifically on business and circularity on Thursday, but it's intentionally sort of multidisciplinary. They're talking about everything from sustainability in the curriculum all the way through to like plastics in the city, like why a circular city, and then our session on business. And so a lot of women in sustainability, a lot of really, really cool stuff. So I would recommend you guys register if you have a moment, just to get the Zoom link and then potentially get the recording afterwards if you're not able to join.
Thank
you so much.
I can forward that out to you guys via email. All right, that concludes us. I don't want to keep anybody past time, so if we can give a quick round of applause to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us today.